Hey guys, and welcome to a SQLite3 tutorial. What SQLite3 is, it's a SQL language within Python. SQL means Structured Query Language, and it's pretty much just a fancy way of saying dealing with databases. If you don't know what a database is, it allows you to create a lot of tables, and within these tables you can store some information. And that's the main reason why people use SQL. If you watched the Flask tutorial, you would see that I was using SQLite3 to actually store everyone's name and age into that database, and then I would print out the information at another URL. So pretty much the basic idea is that we use this to store data, and that's really important in programming. So I'm just going to teach you how to do it, at least the basics right now. Okay, so the first thing you need to do is import the module SQLite3. Oh yeah, and I'm using Python Anywhere right now because this SQLite3 isn't actually working on my normal compiler, so I have to use this. But regardless, you're going to import SQLite3. That's the SQL language with Python. And now what you're going to do is create your database connection. So the way we do this is we call a variable. I'm going to call it db_con because that's how I learned it, but it doesn't matter what you do. And then we can do something like this. So what this statement means is that we're going to connect to a file called test.db. Now, you may or may not already have this file. If you do have this file, then it'll just connect to that. If you don't have the file, then Python will automatically make it for you, so it saves you some time. Okay. Now that we have our connection established under this variable name, we're going to use this name right here to execute some commands to our database. So within databases, you can create tables, and within these tables, you can create columns, and then you can insert values into the tables, and that's just a convenient way of storing data. So now that we have connected to our test.db, in my case, I don't have that yet, so it's just going to create that. The first thing we want to do is create a table. Now, just to clear it up, there is a big difference between table and database. You can create multiple tables within a database. A database is a file like this, but I could theoretically create like 10 or 12 or 20 tables in the same database file. So that's an important distinction. Okay, so if we wanted to create a table, then we have to execute a SQL command. The way we do that is we take our name that we set our connection to, which in my case is db_con, dot execute, and then our command. Did I add one? Yeah, okay. So within these parentheses, we're going to create our table. We're going to name our table, and we're going to name the columns of the table. And we can also do other things with the columns. We can define data types and stuff, but I won't cover all of that now. So you have to use SQL commands. Now, these commands I'm going to be using, they're very specific. The only things that you can change other than what I'm doing is the name of the table and the columns of the table. So the keyword for creating a table is, well, create table. And then here, there's something that I prefer to do. I prefer to say create table if not exists. This means that it'll create the table if it doesn't exist. Actually, we'll just show this later. So you can just use create table right now, and then you can name your table. I'm going to name the table test. Actually, you might confuse out the file. Create table, let's see, information. Okay. So I'm creating a table called information, and in this information table, I'm going to be storing certain things. First, I'm going to store the name, and then I'm going to store the age. So I'm just putting a name and age because this is what I did with my Flask tutorial. And yeah, okay, so let me just move this to the same line. It's a bit easier to see. And there we go. Okay, so by the way, your statement has to be within, it has to be in a string format like this. Okay, so what we're creating here, we're doing this SQL command called create table, all caps. And then we're naming our table. You can name it whatever you want. I just named it information. And then we have two parentheses here. And within the parentheses, we're naming our columns. My first column is name. So you can imagine like we have a table here. It's called information. And then this column is name. This column is age. We can add more. We can add as many columns as we want, but I'm just going to use 2 for now. And this is the basic way to create a table. Now you can do other things too. I was talking about specifying data type. So for example, if you wanted to prevent people from putting numbers as their name, then you could specify that this name has to be a string. Way you would do that is after your column name, you would say varchar. Varchar is a SQL way of just saying string, so yeah, and then after varchar, you're going to put 2 parentheses, and within there, you're going to say how long you think that the name will be. So I'm going to just say 7 because that's a reasonable number for the characters of a name. So what I'm saying right here is creating a column name that only accepts strings in that column, and my database can expect to have about 7 characters in every name. Of course, there's some that are shorter than that, some that are longer, but that's just a general idea. And for age, if I want to specify data type, I can say integer, integer like that. And then within parentheses, I'm going to say 2, because unless you're like a centenarian or you're between 0 and 10, then this is how many digits your age is going to be. So what I've created right now is a table called information with 2 columns, name and age. In name, we're only going to be accepting strings, and age, we're only going to be accepting integers. For the name column, I'm going to expect about a string of length 7. In the age column, I'm going to be expecting an integer of length 2. Now this stuff right here that I just put, this is not required. So if you don't want to put this, you don't have to. In fact, I'm not going to put it right now. But if you want to, you can do that. There are just a few changes you have to make. Okay, so once you do your create table information, your column statement, you have to put a semicolon at the end. You're probably not familiar with this if the only language you've done is Python, but in most other programming languages, you always end a statement with a semicolon. But in Python, they don't do that, so it might seem a bit weird to you. But remember, within the string is a SQL statement. So we do have to put the semicolon there, as you can see here. Now, I was talking about in the beginning that you can say either create table, or you can say a modified version of that called create table if not exists. So the way we do that is after create table, we just say if not exists, and then the rest of it information. What this does is, it creates a table if it doesn't exist. I prefer this because that means that if I'm running the same code a bunch of times and I don't put this, then the database, Python will be we'll be trying to create multiple tables with the same name and same columns and everything, and that's just useless. So this makes sure that the first time I run it, it'll create this table, but after that, it won't actually create the table, so I don't have to go back and erase this. I prefer if not exists, but you can use create table too. That's just extra work, so it's better to use if not exists. Now, after you do your statement, you're going to put db_con, I'm in all caps, db_con.commit. With that, if you don't put this statement in, then Python won't actually execute the statement, which is kind of dumb because it says execute here, but that's how it works. So if you were to not put commit, then this statement will not actually be carried out. and you will not have a table called information with columns name and age. Okay, so now we've gone over how to create a table and specifying the name and the columns and if we want data types and length. Now let's learn how to actually put data into our table, because otherwise that would be useless. We're going to put another execute statement because we're going to execute a SQL statement. And what we want to say is between these parentheses, between the quotation marks, because remember this is a SQL statement, so we need to put it in string format. We're going to say insert into, and then the name of our table, which in my case is information, and then capital values, and then in these parentheses we're going to put in whatever we want to put in. So I'm going to say I want to put in Bob as the name and 35 as the age. So this statement right here, all it's at, and remember we need to add the semicolon at the end because it's SQL statement. What this is doing right here, we're taking that information table and into it we're inserting Bob and 35. And if you're wondering the order of what you enter here, it is specific to the column. So if I were to say 35 first and then Bob, it would think that my name is 35 and my age is Bob, which makes no sense at all. So you want to make sure that you put it in order, the same order as your columns as you want it to be. Okay, and now we need to commit that, because remember, anytime we do an execute statement, we need to commit it right after. Okay, so now what we've done is created a table. You connect it to our test.db file, which we may or may not have. Then we created a table called information with 2 columns, name and age, and then into that table we inserted Bob as a name and 35 as an age. What if we want to retrieve the data from the table? Otherwise, it would also be useless. The way we do that is we can't actually use a dbcon.execute statement. We have to do something else called a cursor. So how do we do that? When we want to retrieve data from a database, whether it's the information within the database or the database columns or whatever, we need to use something called a cursor. And the way we define this is another variable name, and then we're going to put our connection name and then .cursor with empty parentheses. So I've just created a cursor called C, and using this tiny letter but also powerful variable, I will be able to retrieve information from this table, from any table I want in this file. Okay, so down here, let's do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to assign a variable rows is equal to c.execute. It's still execute. And the way I retrieve the data from the tables is select all from information. Okay, a lot of stuff just happened, so let's explain. This SQL statement right here, remember, instead of using dbcon.execute, we're using c.execute because we're taking information from the database that's already been put in, so we're actually retrieving information from there. So what this statement's saying is that go into, or add the semicolon, select all from information. So we're going to select all the values for all the columns, all the rows, every single time a value's been entered for all the columns, everything in that table we are going to select. This star right here is a special SQL way of saying all. This just really means select all from information, but for SQL we say star. And then we say select star from, and then our table name, and we call it information, so I'm just going to put information. And yeah. So if you don't want to select everything, let's say I only wanted to know the name when the age, no, let's just say I wanted to know the age of Bob, but I didn't want to know the age of Billy because it's useless information. No one cares about Billy. So how do we do that? If we wanted to say select the age where name equals Bob, we're going to say select age where name equals Bob. So this is also very self-explanatory. SQL statements in general are pretty easy to understand. It's just normal English, really. So we're going to select the data in the age column where the name, which is the other column, is equal to Bob. And we have to put these apostrophes because it is going to assume that we're inputting a string. So instead of returning all the ages, all the names and stuff, it'll only select that age where the name equals Bob. So it's going to go down to the it's going to go down through the table. It's going to see where name equals Bob, and it's going to take that row and then select the age from there. And in that case, we're only going to get one value back. If we want to see a specific value, that's what we can do. But for this example, I'm just going to say select all from information because I want to see everything. And I assign this to a variable rows because when we execute the statement, it's actually going to return a list of lists. So it's better just to assign it to a variable so then we can show all the lists nicely. So the way we do that is for row in rows. Hopefully you know how these for statements work. For row in rows, remember that rows is a list of lists. So row will be assigned to a list. And let's just return row. Okay, so hopefully this works. Console limit reached. Oh, I need to do this. Hold on. Be right back. Alright, I just fixed that problem right there. So let's save this. And actually, we have an error right here. Return is outside function. Oh, oops. Yeah, why am I putting return? Sorry, I meant to say print. So print row. And now let's save that. Okay, there we go. Let's run it. I think it's down here. Yeah, okay. Alright, so what we have here is two Bob 35s. The reason why there are two of them is because I ran this thing twice. So it's so the first time I ran it, it inserted Bob and 35, and then the second time I ran it, it also inserted Bob and 35. So you can forget the second one or the first one, whatever. But as you can see, we see that the first value inputted was Bob, and the second one was 35, which is the age. And this is how it came out in our Flash tutorial too, so that's why it's like a list here. You can see that it came in a list, but if I were to say print rows, I'm not doing the for row in rows thing again. If you look at it now, it's going to show me a list of lists. Or actually, it's gonna give this thing, which is it's just telling you where the cursor object is at. So it's not in human readable format. It is a list of lists though, if you're wondering. But if we want to see it ourselves, then we have to put print row. Or we have to assign a variable to every object in that list and then print that object itself. So what we're doing here, we should end up with 4, if I'm correct. 4 Bob 35s, yes, because we ran this 4 times. Now what if we want to take user input and then input it into the table, because that's usually what's useful. Well, the way we're going to do that is we're going to assign variables as inputs. It's actually a lot easier than you may think. So I'm going to say name equals input. What is your name? Age equals input. What is your age? And then here, instead of putting Bob and 35, I'm actually going to say this. Now, this may look very weird, but then there we go. And plus. Okay, is that good? Alright, here's the age. Okay, so what's happening right here, it looks really weird with all stuff, but I'm putting in in this list, instead of specifically Bob and instead of specifically 35, I'm putting in the name and age that the user inputted. Now the reason why there's so many apostrophes and quotation marks is that, if you recall, they have to be in these apostrophes. So we actually need to put these apostrophes here. So let's say the name was Billy, then it would say apostrophe Billy apostrophe, which is why we have this, just this, that, and that. Okay, so now if we run this, it should prompt it to us first. What is my name? My name is Billy. How old am I? I am 98. Okay, as you can see here, we have those 4 Bobs. I guess they're all twins, but we have these 4 Bobs, not twins. And then here we have Billy 98, which is what we just put in. So yeah, that's a pretty... So now you understand how they work. And if you go back to my Flash tutorial, you'll understand everything from then on. And yeah, that's the basics of SQLite, or SQL within Python. There are other commands here, SQL commands you can do. You can delete a table, you can delete information from a table, you can add a new column after you've made it. But yeah, so this is a very basic. Oh yeah, and if you're wondering if I can create a new table, yes, I actually can create new tables within the same database file. So let me just create a new table called new table. So I'm just proving to you here that I can actually make multiple tables within a singular database file. So I'll have the same parameters, except I'll say that this has to, except I'll make sure that the age is an integer of length 2. In that case, I don't need these anymore. I can just put a plain old number, which will appear right there. Never mind. H. Okay, so now if we do it, run, hopefully I didn't mess up. Alright, my name is Bob, and I'm 78. Alright, so as you can see, it says Bob 78. Now, if you looked at so just first thing to notice, we don't have those previous Bobs or those previous Billy, or that previous Billy. It's brand new because we created a brand new table. So that just proves to you that we can create multiple tables within the same database file. And also, you might notice that there's no apostrophes around the 78 anymore. That's because up here we specified the data type as an integer, so SQL will not be expecting any apostrophes. It'll be expecting just a plain number. But when we didn't write this, it was automatically expecting apostrophes. So that's why that was there. Okay, and let's just do one last little thing. I can take out all this. Let me run a simple command called show tables. If we run that, your show. Let me see, did I mess this up? Or I don't know. I actually can't find what I did wrong there. But yeah, so that's the basics of SQL. Actually, let me go over one last thing. When you're working with databases, there's a specific type of error that occurs, and that's called a SQLite3 operational error. This is a very specific error, so we can actually use this to our advantage. Now let's say we don't want this ugly traceback most recent call. Let's say we don't want that. And let's just put an incorrect statement right here. That makes absolutely no sense. So what we're going to say is that so if you know what try and except are, essentially what it means is that try to perform this command, but if there's an error, then do something else. So that would be try and except. Over here, it's kind of like an if-else statement in a way, but not quite. And then we can say print could not show databases. And when you're working with SQLite3, there's a very specific type of error that comes up. It's called that SQLite3.operational error. So you can actually say that here. And now, if I run it, instead of seeing that disgusting trace back could not blah 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 blah, all we see is could not show databases. It looks a lot cleaner, and it's a bit more useful. So that's just a little like trick I was showing you there. If you watch like the rest of my videos, you'll see that I'm going to use databases a lot throughout, and I'll talk about it a little more as I go on through it, so you'll understand. But yeah, that's the basics of SQLite 3 within Python. I hope you learned something in this video, and I'll see you next time.